Keep in mind, this story happened over the span of only 1 month and a half, and everything happened quite quickly. For some context, my name will be Kat, his name will be John, and his mom's name is Karen. This is a story I've only ever told a handful of people, and I'll try to be as clear and accurate as I can, as this happened just over a year ago. But obviously I can't remember everything verbatim. And I know, I made a lot of mistakes, and I'll probably mention it a few times, but honestly I've criticized my own decisions a million times over, and it's not really useful to think about what I could have done differently, so please be respectful in the comments. Okay, so here's the story. About a year ago, I had just gone through a really bad breakup. He dumped me over text on Valentine's Day. And after having been together for quite a while, this was quite a shock for me. I was absolutely devastated, and I felt pretty bad about myself. It only took about 2 weeks before I was looking for another boyfriend, more or less a rebound guy. Don't judge me. That's when I met John. We met on Tinder and instantly hit it off. I was in my first year of university studying biology, and he was in his first year studying history. He was smart and friendly and had a lot of common interests as me. He was giving me some weird vibes, but maybe it was that he just seemed a bit desperate. But honestly, I was too after my bad breakup, so I didn't think much of it. After only a few days of talking, he asked me to go on a date with him to a play. I was so excited because that was such an interesting date idea, and I thought it would be pretty romantic. We go on the date, and it goes well. He rides the subway back a few stops with me, and I tell him about my ex. He tells me that he can't believe anyone would let a pretty girl like me go, and that he would do anything to make sure he kept me if he was dating me. Now, having read the title, you can see just how creepy that statement actually is. But I guess I was just naive or just happy that someone agreed that my ex wasn't a good guy, and I took it as a compliment, and I didn't really see anything wrong with it at the time. We continued to message and going on occasional dates after this. All was well. After a few dates, John had told me he had really bad depression and anxiety. Now, it's important for me to mention that I also have some pretty extreme depression and mental health problems as well. And my breakup had kind of launched me into a downward spiral. So it was almost a relief to hear him say that, because I felt like he wouldn't judge me for having depression as well. After that, we would always confide in each other about our depression and help each other get out of bad mental states. After this revelation, we got really close, really fast. We had only dated for about a month, but we already had a very intense relationship. I even thought that I loved him. Now, another problem with him was his mother, Karen. She was very possessive of him, and maybe it's because of his depression, but he couldn't do anything without telling his mother first. She was very possessive of him. Maybe it's because of his depression, but he couldn't do anything without telling his mother about it first. One night he fell asleep at my place, and he forgot to set an alarm, and when he woke up, he had 10 missed calls and around 50 messages from his mom trying to find him. She had apparently called every hospital in town looking for him. She knew he was going to spend the night. She was just concerned, I guess, because he slept 2 hours later than he said he would. She would do other things as well to try to manipulate him, like verbally abuse him or tell him he's a bad son if he doesn't do everything she wants, and she even set limits to how often and when he could come to my place. I wasn't happy with this, obviously. I told him that I thought it was ridiculous that she treated him like a child, and that he's an adult and can do whatever he wants and go on dates whenever he wants. If she wants to know where he is, that's fine, but he shouldn't have to ask for permission. We had a small argument about it, but he was obviously a mama's boy, so I just decided to drop it. At this point, I still hadn't even met his mom, so who was I to really judge? Another thing I'll mention is that one time he had asked me to do roleplay with him, in which I wear glasses and call him specifically Sweetie. He was very clear that he wanted me to call him that. He told me that it was a teacher fetish. I told him I really wasn't into that kind of thing. I'm sorry." He asked a few more times and never really dropped it, but I always said no. This will be important to the story later on. After one particular bad night, he came over to console me, and I told him I was feeling pretty depressed. And his response? He asked me to marry him. This was only after just 1 month of dating. I laughed, thinking he was joking, but he didn't laugh. He just stared me in the eyes. There was an awkward silence, and I just said, "What?" And then he said,
"I'm serious. I love you. I want to spend the rest of my life with you."
I laughed and gave him a firm no. He looked disappointed but dropped it. I was kind of concerned about this and confided in my friend, and she said if it were her, she would dump him. I thought it was quite strange, but I really relied on the emotional support that he gave me, and I was very emotionally fragile at the time, so I decided I'd just pretend it didn't happen. I'd like to mention that I know I made mistakes, and I ignored the obvious red flags. But when I was with him, he often implied or even stated that I was way too mentally unwell or unattractive to get anyone else better than him. And he also said other manipulative things as well that made me feel like breaking up with him would be really bad for me. He would often make comments about how he would hurt himself if I ever broke up with him, and it would be my fault. Yeah, he was a really great guy, but I thought I loved him. After a few days later, I went to his place for the first time ever. He lived with his parents, so when his mom got home from work, I of course introduced myself. She seemed very skeptical of me and wouldn't even shake my hand. She gave me a fake smile and said hi. Then she started focusing all of her attention onto John. "Hi sweetie, how's it going?" she said, giving him a really big kiss on the lips. Yeah. She also wore very similar glasses to him and continued to call him sweetie all night. That was basically the only thing she ever called him. Sound familiar to anything else I mentioned? Yeah, I was very much creeped out, but I kept my mouth shut. His mom never spoke to me, only really ever talking to me if it was necessary, and I got a very weird vibe off of her. I had only gone to her house and met her willingly one time more after this, and it went basically the same, except this time I was doing homework, and she kept making comments about how I was stupid because I couldn't do my homework on my own if I ever took a break to talk to John about something. I tried to argue with her, and she would call me names, but John just shut us both down, and we all moved on. His dad also lived there, but mostly didn't say anything and just lurked around in the background, not really saying much or just staying in the basement. So he's not really important to the story, just an interesting detail. Fast forward a few days. I was still talking to John, but I think he sensed I was growing distant from him. I get a text from John very late at night telling me he was suicidal and that he really needed me. I had a midterm the next day, and I told him I'm sorry I can't be there and that I needed some sleep and to be at school in the next morning for my midterm. He was very upset, however, so I suggested he go to the hospital and I told him I can meet him there after my midterm. He didn't respond. After a half hour, I get a text from him. He tells me he's outside my residence building and his mom drove him there. I told him again that I couldn't go to his place. He says that it's okay and that he just wanted to talk. I eventually give in and go outside to meet him and go for a walk. He starts walking me in the direction of the parking lot. I get a bad feeling in my stomach. I don't know why, but I just felt scared. I say, "Why don't we walk this way?" and try to turn and go the other direction, and he just says,
"No, it's fine,"
and grabs my arm really tightly. I don't know what else to do, so I just say, "John, you're making me really uncomfortable. Why are you taking me to the parking lot?" He didn't respond and just kept walking me in silence. I try to pull my arm away from him, but he has a really tight grip on me. "John," I said loudly. He then says,
"It's okay, chill out."
"John, let me go home," I say firmly, pulling my arm. There was no one else around to help me. I was scared.
I really don't think you want to do that,
he says in an emotionless tone. What? Yes, I do. I want to go home. I'm about to cry at this point. I was just so confused and scared. He starts explaining.
Listen, Kat. My mom is in the driveway, and if you don't get in the car soon, she's going to call the police and tell them you're suicidal. The police will come here and cause a scene, and then hold you against your will. Do you really want that?
My brain started going a million miles a minute. I lived in university residence, and I really didn't want the police to pick me up where everyone could see me and cause an awful scene. I also had been to the hospital before, and my school had warned me of possible repercussions if I tried to harm myself on campus again, which he reminded me of. I was really confused and I felt betrayed. However, quickly weighing the pros and cons in my head, I thought supporting my boyfriend when he needs me and not causing a scene would be the easiest thing to do, still not realizing why he was doing what he was trying to do. I tell him I'm not happy and that he's blackmailing me and that I don't want to be with him if he's going to treat me this way. But the threats just continue, so I go to his car. I get there and there she is, his evil mother Karen, with the most disgusting ugly smirk I'd ever seen on her face. I was just about to call the police, she says. John stands beside me as I get in the back of the car and he gets in the front. She starts to drive. As the shock began to wear off, I then realized I was super pissed off. I start yelling that they're trying to manipulate me, and I go off on Karen for manipulating her son and being a bad mother, and then going off on him for being a bad boyfriend. Meanwhile, Karen is screaming at me that I'm a slut and a bad girlfriend, and that I should just end my life because I'm such a bad influence for her son. And we have one of the most intense arguments I've ever had in my life. I hate confrontation, and I honestly didn't know I was capable of so much rage. But fear and adrenaline does crazy things to people. Karen then pulls over the car. "Get out," she says. I lunge at the door, ready to run away. "But I will call the police on you." I hesitate. Who do you think they'll believe? A reliable older lady with a respectable job? Or a slutty little autistic hood rat like you? Especially with your history of mental health. And then she starts laughing like a maniac. The situation really dawned on me. I couldn't leave. While I hesitated to think, hand still on the door handle, she escalated her threats from telling the police I was suicidal to telling the police and my school that I assaulted her and her son after he tried to break up with me. And even though the car was parked and the door was unlocked, I couldn't leave. She then said, "In my car, you don't get to talk to me like that. So either be civil and quiet or get the heck out of my car." John stayed quiet throughout this whole car ride, not defending himself or his mother and not helping me, just stone cold and expressionless. I started sobbing and crying and begging her to please let me go, which she then said, "You have every right to leave. Get out if you want to go." I felt like I had no options, so I swallowed my pride and apologized to disgusting Karen and let myself get driven to their house. I tried texting my friend what was going on, but she wasn't answering. Once we get there, it's like 1 or 2 in the morning. I wasn't really sure because, of course, my phone had died. Great timing. Karen had been taunting me and making fun of me the whole way home, and I wasn't even able to defend myself after her new threats. I was still crying, and John helped me out of the car. He held on to me as I went inside. I'm not really sure if it was because he wanted to get me in quickly or because I could barely move. I was crying so hard. But they kept shushing me, and Karen raised her hand as if to slap me if I didn't shut up. Her words. So I stifled my tears until we got inside. Once we got inside, John brings me straight to his room. He asks if I want to watch a movie, but I just lay down on his bed and sobbed. He sits beside me and touches my arm in what would have been a comforting way under a different circumstance. I pull away from him, and he just quietly watches videos and occasionally tells me that this was for the best, how I couldn't hurt myself as long as he was protecting me, and now we could both be safe together. His dad was home, but the whole time everything was happening, he said nothing to me and only came into John's room one time to give me a strange look and then leave. He was a weird guy. John's mom came in a while later and told me to sit up and stop crying, saying that this was for the best for me and John, and that she's only doing this because she cares about us. I don't have anything to say to her, so I just pet her dog and don't make eye contact. She berates me and insults me with no reaction other than a few snide comments from me that John would tell me were uncalled for, followed by more tears and silence. And then she started going after me for petting the dog. "Why don't you make eye contact? What are you, autistic?" Then proceeds to call me a retard and other slurs. And what really makes this even more disgusting is her respectable job is that she works with disabled teenagers. I ignore her, and then she starts saying really hurtful things. Now, I can take an insult, but she crossed the line when she started talking about how my mother was abusive, and how I deserved it, and she can see why I was abused. Now, it's true, my mother may have been abusive, but she really crossed the line. She had no right to talk about that, and John had no right to tell her about that. That was my business. She then went on to say that she was a much better mother, and I should be grateful that she's doing this for me. The whole time I was there, she kept implying that this was in some sick way supposed to help me. I feel like I was only there for John to have someone with him though. I absolutely lost it at the comments about my mom though, and I started yelling at her about how she's abusive and way worse than my mother, and that I hate her. And we would have a drawn-out screaming match for a really long time. And again, John doesn't defend me. He just says that I should listen to his mom. After more insults and yelling, she storms off, and it's just me and John. And I tell him I'm breaking up with him and that I want to leave right now. He goes to get his mom, who says I'm just having a rough night and don't mean it, and we both should just get some rest. John gives me pajamas to wear, and I get dressed in his closet and go to bed. He was sleeping beside me. I wasn't afraid John was going to hurt me, and don't worry, he didn't. Not physically, at least. But I was still uncomfortable sleeping beside him because I felt so betrayed and scared, and I even felt violated. I wanted to leave more than anything. I felt like an animal in a cage. I then got up and bolted to the front door, only for him to run behind me and then grab me and have Karen block my way. I started screaming. "Let me go, please, I'm sorry, let me go!" I was sobbing and was trying to be as clear as I could through my tears. Karen just looked at me like I was the most disgusting thing she had ever seen in her life, and then scoffed at me. "Grow up," she said and walked off. John brought me back to his room and locked his door. His mom came back after he let her in a few minutes later, and she said she had some kind of pill to help me sleep. I absolutely refused to take it. She kept insisting, and I kept saying no. "I'm not trying to poison you, I'm trying to help you. Just take it." She kept shouting, but I didn't trust that crazy woman. John took one first to prove that they were safe, and it was pretty clear after over an hour of arguing and John taking one, I wasn't going to have much of a choice. I only pretended to take one at first, but this psycho checked my mouth and made sure I actually took it. She basically shoved one in my mouth after she realized I didn't take the other one. After a while, I felt very, very tired and fell asleep. I still don't know what she gave me, but it tasted awful, and it was the kind to dissolve under my tongue. She had them in a clear plastic baggie with no label on it. I woke up the next morning and John and his mom were both in the kitchen eating breakfast. I saw my chance. I was finally alone. I got dressed super fast and I found my phone where he had hidden it, still not charged. It had my fare card for public transport in the case though, so I pocketed my phone and quickly snuck out through the front door. Nothing had ever been so intense for me before. I put on my shoes really quick and opened the door and freaking ran. I ran like the freaking wind, on the verge of tears and shaking. I had never ran so fast before in my life. I didn't know the neighborhood, and I didn't know how to get home, but I needed to get away, and fast. I have no idea if they chased me or not, or if they even noticed right away. The dog stayed quiet. I found a bus stop, and I get on the first bus that shows up. I pull out my card and tap it, and it didn't have any money on it. My brain just buzzed. I had no way to get home. I needed to get on this bus, and I had to get away. The bus driver shrugged and said you should have the money. Meanwhile, I was still just staring at my card. Then I just started sobbing and I practically fell over. I was crying so hard. I tried to explain to the bus driver what was happening, but I was crying so hard and talking so fast that I made no sense. The bus driver just said to me, "Whoa, are you okay?" And I just told him no and started crying harder. He just quietly handed me a transfer, and I thanked him and sat down really quickly, noticing everyone staring at me. I just put my hood up and cried quietly. I still didn't know how to get home, but I realized the bus was going to a subway station, and even though it was a long ride, I could get home from the station. As soon as we got there, I ran onto the subway, still crying and shaking. I probably looked like quite the sight. The subway eventually got to my school, and then I realized I couldn't go home. John knew where I lived, and God, he could have gone to the police. I didn't know what to do. I saw someone with a phone charger and ran over and asked if I could please charge my phone and that it was an emergency. Typical millennial me didn't know my friend's phone number. I charged my phone, face covered in tears and probably smudged mascara, and immediately texted my friend. I had told her right before my phone died that John and Karen wouldn't let me leave their car, and she had sent me quite a few messages and had apparently tried to come to my house to look for me too. I told her where I was, and I asked her if I could go to her place. I got many messages from John as well. John tried saying he tried to kill himself and that he really needed me, that I needed him, and that I'm making a huge mistake. Absolutely anything and everything to try and make me respond. Now, you guys will probably judge me for this, but I decided to go and visit him in the hospital. I don't know why after all that I decided to do this, but I did. After I got to the ER, his mom then told the nurse that I was also threatening suicide, and that I needed to be put on suicide watch too. The nurses took me aside and asked me, and of course I said no, and I was legally an adult so they couldn't take Karen's word over mine, and they didn't hospitalize me. I told John we were over and I hope he gets better soon, but he was really mad at me. He said that his mom told him how I was suicidal, and how she said that she heard the nurses talking to each other about how I was lying to get attention, and all this other BS. I tried to defend myself to him, but I just left defeated, gave Karen the middle finger, and literally ran the heck out and never looked back. I crashed at my friend's place and slept on her floor for a week. A little while later, I got a text from one of John's friends, basically insinuating that he took his life and it was all my fault. And I told the guy that after that, what the family did to me, and they can all go to hell and to never message me ever again, and blocked the number. To this day, I have no idea if John is alive or not. Also, you might have noticed that I didn't call the police. I did speak to a police officer about it eventually, and my concerns about Karen would be more reliable than me, and I didn't have much evidence. They said if I want, I could file a report, but I honestly never did. I wanted absolutely nothing to do with them anymore. To those who want to say I wasn't actually kidnapped because I wasn't tied up or anything, which someone has said to me before, I may have been allowed to leave physically, but emotionally they made me feel like I didn't have a choice to stay. And they did drug me, so I don't know. So to John, but mostly Karen, I really pray and hope I never meet either of you ever again. This happened around 2004, when I was in my mid-20s, and my sister, the unfortunate main character in this story, had just turned 21. At the time, she and her boyfriend lived with my fiance and I. On weekends, we went out to one of the two bars that had karaoke, air hockey, etc. This particular night, we were at the bar further out from where we lived in the city, a good half an hour by car. Everyone was having drinks, socializing with people we knew, singing karaoke, and nothing out of the ordinary really. Except that night my sister had started hanging out with these two older ladies who had a liquor store in their purses. And they were quite sharing, although I didn't know it at the time. As she tended to drink a lot more than I did, that was a score for her. Less money spent on drinks, but she ended up far more hammered than usual. Towards the end of the night, around 1:45, she was really drunk. The aforementioned fiancé, my sister's boyfriend, and I were in a heated air hockey game, planning to leave as soon as it was over. She walked up to us and said she was going to smoke a cigarette outside until we were done. About 5 minutes later, we paid our tab and walked out, but she wasn't on the porch area where most of the smokers congregated at. Okay, weird, but not quite alarming. At least, not yet. We went out back of the bar to check for her, inside, in the restroom, and the parking lot as well. It is notable that this particular bar was in a business park, so there were multiple businesses that were closed, as well as the Mexican restaurant next door that had just closed as well. We searched, asked everyone that knew us and those who didn't if they had seen her. No one had. I asked the coworkers from the restaurant that were sitting outside as well. They seemed nervous when telling me they hadn't seen her, but I didn't really think on that much until later. By then, I was in full-on panic after trying to call her cell phone about 15 times only to have it go to voicemail. Being a bit inebriated myself, I started searching for her. I went as far as to take off my heels and start running down the highway to search for her. Honestly, there had been many times where she would start walking home in the past, though never from this place, as it was so far away from where we lived. The fiancé and her boyfriend thought we should go to the house to see if she got someone to bring her home. It seemed unlikely, but not unheard of. We get home, and she's nowhere to be found. Just as we were about to head back and I was going to phone the police, I received a call from the police department on my phone. They indicated that they had my sister and there had been an incident and I needed to get down there right away. We rushed to the PD, where we were then taken into a room with my sister. Her face was red from obvious crying and bruises were starting to show on her arms and chest. She said that when she told us she was going outside, she thought we said we were leaving, so she walked to the car. After a few minutes being drunk and tired, she sat down up against it to wait. A van pulled up, and a young man was asking her directions to somewhere. She walked closer to try to explain, when suddenly the back door flew open, and 2 other men grabbed her and then threw her in, then taking off. They were rough with her, hitting her a few times while holding her down, saying they only wanted money. They snatched her purse from her, breaking the straps, and searched it, quite haphazardly as they didn't find the $30 she had in it. After driving around a bit speaking in Spanish and she couldn't understand, they pulled out a gun. Making sure she saw it, then put a bandana around her eyes, then telling her they'd let her go. She was driven to some woods by a neighborhood she didn't know. The door was opened and they pushed her out, telling her to run and that if she took off the blindfold or happened to turn around, they'd shoot her. Well, she ran and ran. Eventually, she did take off the blindfold, and she came to the first door that she saw, beating on it and screaming for help. The police were called and she was picked up, and now we're back to my being there, hearing what I feared had happened. We filed a report. The police did a search, and they did locate the bandana that she ripped off, but she was so intoxicated and terrified, she wasn't able to give a clear description of the van other than it being white, as well as the 3 occupants other than being young Mexican men. The investigation didn't turn anything up, as no cameras caught any of this. Hell, we even had detectives in our home who said to us, "Look, we need the truth. If you got drunk and just went home with someone and didn't want your boyfriend to find out, we will file charges on you." Aside from the bruises, broken person, or trauma, there wasn't anything concrete that they could go on. That was unpleasant. I'm still fairly convinced that someone at the restaurant knew something given their suspicious behaviors when I asked about her, but the police were never able to find that link. All said and done, the guys were never found. Eventually we just moved on, in different states. It's now just a story in our lives. It still makes me sick thinking of what could have happened, but thankfully didn't. Be safe out there. And to the badly organized trio who kidnapped my adult sister, let's never meet. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed today's video. And if you have your own personal scary story, be sure to submit that to my subreddit, at reddit.com/r/southerncannibal or to my email at southerncannibal@gmail.com. I'm always looking for new stories. And before we bring this video to a close, I just want to shout out all of my $5 or more patrons, as well as my $3 or more patrons featured on screen. Shout out to Babe Lincoln, Beth A, Kate E, Katrina T, Celeste S, Ellie S, Emily W, Heather B, Howard R, Jazzy G, Jonathan C, Joseph F, Lori J, Matthew B, Michael G, Steph L, Tammy S, Terry H, 2Eki for you, and Victor R. Thank all of you so much for supporting me on Patreon. I really appreciate it more than you know. And if any of you would like to join these awesome people and also become a patron, head over to my Patreon at patreon.com/southerncannibal. Thank you everyone, and have a good one. And remember to always